I think that, having a broken arm is a marker of a great childhood.
Yeah.
I'm like, if you didn't have a few scars and burns and broken limbs, I'm not sure what you did.
Why do you parent like that?
Hi, welcome to this week's episode of Why Do You Parent Like That? The podcast with one set of questions and 1,000,000 ways to parent. I feel like I actually never introduced myself on here, so hi, my name is Abby Harrison. I am the creator and host of this podcast, and the reason I started it is because parenting is not a homogenous activity like social media would lead us to believe. So I thought by asking each different guest the same 5 questions, it would really highlight all our differences. And we can learn so much from hearing different stories, but also I hope that you'll hear the stories that feel familiar and make you feel less alone too. I have a background in social work and counselling and am a mum myself, but mainly I just love to connect with people, and this has been such a great way to do that. So, a few announcements. 1, please rate, review, subscribe and share, do all the things. The algorithm gods really seem to push out the content to new followers if there's a lot of engagement from pre-existing listeners, so it actually really does help people find us, so please do that. 2, I have launched a Substack, a newsletter. The info for it is linked in the show notes, but also I have talked about it more on my Instagram as well. There's an option for free or for paid subscription to that, and there are perks for both tiers. But the main reason I'm doing this is to offset the costs of creating the pod. So if you enjoy the content and are in the space to contribute financially, that would be amazing. But please know that times are tough, and I hold no resentment to those who can't contribute financially. Like, it just is what it is. Number 3, this episode is sponsored by Benny and the Jets, the coolest kids clothing store around. When I was asking the owner, Shan, what she wanted me to say about the store, she said, tell your listeners that ethical clothing doesn't have to be beige. And I loved that. Her store is all about ethical, sustainable kid stuff, but it's also just like really, really cool. I could literally buy anything from that store. She also has given me a code to give to listeners, so you'll get a 10% discount on non-sale items. So if you just chuck WDYPLT10, WDYPLT10 in at checkout to access that. We also have a huge giveaway to the value of over $500 of a bunch of awesome stuff from Benny and the Jets, and that's on my Instagram. So head over to my Instagram to enter that because it is just the coolest stuff. And even if you're listening to this and you're going, oh, it's not going to be that cool, I never enter giveaways, go and look at what the stuff is before you're deciding that you're not going to enter, because it's like, I'm devastated I can't win this giveaway myself. Okay. I think that's all the announcements done. This week I have Jo Robertson on the pod, who honestly probably doesn't even need an introduction at this point, but she is just so cool, so honest, so insightful, and just like was such an interesting chat. So I hope you will enjoy it, and if you do, please share it with a friend. And just before I forget to say it, Jo does talk a little bit about the birth of her first, where she had a tricky birth and had some ongoing health issues as a result of that. And so if that's a difficult topic for you right now, please take care of yourself and either skip forward, or if this episode's not for you, I totally understand. Okay, love you! Say it back. My guest today is someone who has made it her life's work to help people talk about things they'd really, really rather not. Jo Robertson is a therapist, educator, and all-round expert in navigating tricky conversations. The ones we tend to avoid, tiptoe around, or bury under a polite silence and then change the subject. Whether it's the awkward chat with your partner that's been brewing for months, or the impossible question your kid hits you with while you're just trying to butter some toast, Jo has a way of helping us lean in instead of panic. Beyond her therapeutic work, Jo is a passionate child protection advocate. She co-founded the Light Project, aiming to equip youth, families and professionals with tools to navigate the new porn landscape. Currently, she's leading Make Sense, a project founded on improving the filtering and regulation of illegal sexual content online to protect children and adolescents. Her work is smart, grounded and full of humour because, let's face it, if we're going to survive these conversations, we may as well laugh and maybe cry our way through them. Jo isn't here to tell you exactly what to say. She's here to help you want to say something at all, to take the fear out of it, to build connection where there might have been disconnection, and to remind us that communication isn't a nice to have in families and relationships. It's everything. So Jo Robertson, welcome to Why Do You Parent Like That?
It's so lovely to be here. And what a lovely introduction.
Yeah, I always like to flatter the guests. I'm
Yeah.
like such a advocate of like tell people how amazing they are.
Yes.
And I've basically just created a podcast to be able to like shower people with compliments. It's great.
Look at you go. That's good. Hopefully someone does that for you at some point.
I'm sure, I'm sure they will. Actually, Sophie Moskowitz from Imperfect Parents is like, I need to come on the podcast and interview you so I can do all the questions to
Yeah,
you. And I'm like,
yeah,
that
that's
seems
good.
scary. So, for people who haven't met you on the internet yet, do you want to just introduce yourself and a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, so I wear many hats.
Mm-hmm.
And every day is pretty different to the day before. I am what we call a sex therapist, but I think that what that sounds like to people is that I talk about like orgasms and vibrators.
Nice.
And whilst there's a piece that's like that, it's much broader. I focus a lot on infidelity and betrayal. So when
Mm-hmm.
sex has gone outside of the relationship, I talk about sexual pain a lot and hormones. So whether that's in the postpartum season or perimenopause. I also do a lot around sexual trauma. Sometimes it's what I call pure sex therapy, which is like sex isn't going well and how do we do better?
Yeah. Yeah.
And probably 90% of the time it's all those other things, which is slightly more complicated.
Mm.
I also, yeah, like you said, I do a lot of advocacy work around children's online safety and focused on grooming, exploitation, exposure to violent or illegal content. So that is pretty grim. And the
Yeah.
way that I make my way through that is just by doing as much parenting education as possible so that we can prevent as opposed to respond to harm. So it's so painful hearing stories that could have been prevented with our kids. And so I've kind of made it my life's mission at the moment to prepare as many families as possible so that their kids just don't have to go through all that hard stuff. Yeah, and that looks like talking about sex and puberty, but also talking about things like abuse and grooming.
Yeah.
So yeah, and you know all the practical stuff like do filters work and should
Yeah.
I track my kids on with their phone?
Honestly, I already knew your work was important just from my like professional background, but since having kids, especially since having a boy, I'm
Yeah.
just like so grateful people like you exist because it's such a scary landscape. And I grew up in a time where like I was the first digital native in my family. And so my parents were obviously doing the best that they could, but they just had like no idea what was going on the internet. And I'm
Yes.
like, I just never want that to be like what happens for my kiddies, but I know that it's going to progress faster
Yeah.
than I can keep up with it. And
It's really hard to keep up.
yeah,
You
it's
can't know
awesome.
all the things, but you can have all the conversations.
Yes.
So that's what's different. Yeah, trying to think. I have 3 kids, so all of which are boys, which is
Hmm.
far too many boys, and not
So
enough.
many boys. It's
Even
a
my
lot of
cat is a
boys.
boy, really. And they're very boy, like very, they live in the stereotypes.
So does mine.
And so they don't subscribe to the stereotypes in terms of believing that boys are a particular way, but they very much live in their masculine self if
Yeah.
people were to describe them. So we have a lot of sport. I deal with a lot of sport day to day, 6 days out of 7. And
Woof.
it's multiple and it's expensive and it's emotional. Like sport is so emotional.
So emotional.
Yes. And I'm married, so my husband Dave, we've been together for 17 years, married for 15. So it's a pretty long-term relationship.
Hmm.
Yeah.
You've kept it going. That's good.
We have kept it going, but what that means is that I do understand what it's like to ride the waves,
Yeah.
to have the seasons where you're like, huh, I'm still with you.
Yeah. Here I am all these years later and we're still
We're
together.
still together. And, there's like just challenges. What is it like when you're both extremely tired? What is it like when you're both extremely stressed?
Mm.
Yeah, where you're trying to build your careers, have kids, pay your mortgage, and have intimacy, like all of that at one time.
Yeah.
And so I really understand, I guess, what it's like to be quite normal, I think. And I
Yeah.
pride myself on that. Is like, I get it. I get what life can look like.
Yeah, which is so nice because obviously, like, there are some really beautiful sex therapists that you follow that are
Yes.
like so in their like sexual prime and just like living their best life and out exploring and doing everything. And if you're in like a committed monogamous relationship, you're like, well, that looks good, but what does it look like for me and my husband of 7 years?
And how do we try and have intimacy while our kid is literally in the bed or next door with one wall
Yes.
separating us?
And
So
probably
there's
going to come through at least three
probably
times
coming
tonight.
through. Yeah.
Yeah.
So all of those real life challenges have navigated them myself. And that's part of why I became a sex therapist, was because I felt like, I get what challenge looks like in this area. We haven't
Yeah.
had like smooth sailing, and neither has basically everyone. So so I value that I guess insight.
Cool. All right, shall we kick right into the questions?
Yeah.
Let's see where we go. So the first question is, tell me about your journey to becoming a parent.
Good. I was keen to have kids young and found Dave young. So that worked out in terms of part one of the plan.
Yeah.
I don't know why I was keen to have kids young. It was always in me that this is something that I wanted to do in the earlier seasons of life. And so we started trying to have a baby when I was 23. And then it took a year. I have what's called a hypopituitary gland, which is I have little hormones kind of running through my body, not as many as maybe other people would. I'm trying to put this in really like lay people terms.
Yeah, no, it's so good because when people come at me with medicalese, I'm like,
Yes, yes. So I actually stopped ovulating altogether, and then they said you're going to have to go through fertility processes, and so we started that. And then fortunately, on the 1 month that we had off that fertility process, I actually got pregnant, which was amazing. But that was
so
the year.
amazing how often that happens.
Yeah,
that,
it's
like,
just great.
yeah.
So that was a year process of getting pregnant. And whilst I know, like my best friend, for example, tried for 5 years. So it was nothing in contrast to that. I definitely got a sense of that angst that goes with watching friends get pregnant when you want to be and how hard that can be. Then, so had my oldest, and then who's now 11 and a half, and then actually got pregnant 4 months later by accident. And so my body, once I had a baby, just like really kicked in.
Figured it out.
It was ready to go. Then I miscarried that baby. And so I was desperate at that point to have another child because I'd already
I
gone
was going to say, what's that like for you? What was that like for you in terms of it was an accidental pregnancy and then you lost that pregnancy?
Yeah.
What was that kind of like?
It was so much of a ride. So definitely fear, shock, anxiety when we thought they were going to be 13 months apart. And so lots of worry about what that was going to look like. I'd had quite a challenging birth. Like I didn't have sensation from my bladder, for example, for 2 years after I had my oldest. So it hadn't all gone smoothly. And then got pregnant 4 months later. I was really happy that ultimately my body had like done that, like had kind of gone into the process itself. Miscarried, found that really difficult, very emotional, didn't realize how hard that was, both physically, lots of pain, but then also emotionally. I thought, that's, you haven't met the child, but actually it's so hard.
So bizarre, isn't it?
And then I was desperate to get pregnant again. I was just like, give me a baby immediately. And so, like I said, my body was ready to go. So I got pregnant again quite quickly. So the oldest two are 16 months apart. And then I had my youngest 2.5 years later. So they're all within 4 years, which is quite rapid fire. But really great in terms of them all being in a similar season of life. They all went to they've all been at primary school together. Now my oldest is at intermediate, but they've had lots of years doing the same things together. So I think that's been quite cool.
So you were done having kids by the time you were like 27, 28?
Yeah, I had my last, so I had my first because I'd had that time of not being able to get pregnant and then it miscarried. So I had my first at 25 and my last at 29, I think.
Amazing. Done by 30.
Done by 30, yeah. And that was actually what I wanted. I wanted to be done by 30. So
I'm the same and I've just done it. So stoked.
Yeah, so it's fun because my 40th, my oldest will be 15.
Yeah.
And I'm quite excited about that. I'm going to make him give a speech.
Yeah, I always think about that because my mum had me young as well. I'm like the classic case of what did my parents do? I guess I'll do that too.
Yeah, I pretty much did that.
My mum had me quite young and at her 50th I could like have a champagne and like it was so nice being an adult at her 50th birthday, and I keep thinking about how like my kids will be adults at my 50th and it's so nice.
Yeah, I'm really excited about that too.
Cool. And so the births were obviously quite tricky. Well, the first birth was quite tricky.
First birth was tricky, more so, it's really hard to make sense of it afterwards. Dave often corrects me actually on things because I was in such a different zone
You're in birth mode.
to him being able to observe. So yeah, he got stuck for a couple of hours and so just made no progress. Heart rate kept dropping, so it was always like are we going to have a C-section? Is he going to come out naturally? Anyway, he ended up coming out with a bit of extra help from the vacuum. And but what happened in that process is that the belief is that while he was stuck in that particular space, I lost all sensation, so had some kind of nerve damage or I don't know what went on, but basically I lost all feeling to my bladder. And so after I had him, they gave me a catheter for recovery, but then eventually were like, take it out, we want to make sure that you can pee. And then nobody realized that I'd lost sensation. So they just pumped me with so much fluid, not realizing that, like, of course, like why would they think that?
Yeah.
So not realizing, and then so my bladder just not exploded, but went far beyond what it should have been able to do.
Yeah.
And then my recovery from that was very slow and long.
Awful.
So yeah, and we didn't really pick up on the sensation thing for quite a long time because I went home with a catheter for 10 days. Once I got that taken out to let my bladder recover, once I got that taken out, I was like just spontaneously urinate, like with
That's so hard.
with no sensation. So it was the weirdest thing. Like, I just went to the bathroom and then all of a sudden I was going to the bathroom, like it was all happening. And we just couldn't figure out what it all was. But yeah, I had to retrain the muscle essentially in my bladder to over 2 years before I could feel that I needed to go to the bathroom. Otherwise I just worked on clockwork. So it was every 3 to 4 hours I would just make sure I went.
Yeah.
But so it wasn't a great recovery. Then as a result, the following 2 were cesarean sections because we didn't want to do any more damage to my bladder. Yeah. So it was hard. Like I wanted to have a redemptive experience. I wanted to go back and have a more natural delivery, not necessarily like without an epidural, but just a more natural delivery. But the pelvic floor physio just was like, please, no.
Don't. Yeah, please don't. You've done so much good work here.
And I had my second was such a positive C-section experience.
Nice.
Really. So it actually was quite redemptive. It went so smoothly. He breastfed in theatre.
Beautiful.
It was really lovely, skin to skin the whole time. So it felt really positive.
Yeah. And so then what were the early days of, I guess you've spoken a little bit about your first, but what was the sort of like adjustment period like for you of like becoming a mum, and then compared to the other 2, what was those experiences like? Yeah,
so I have a history of mental illness, which means that for my oldest, I went through maternal mental health. And to be honest, it wasn't a very positive. No, actually, the second one I went through maternal mental health because the first one went so badly.
Oh.
So yeah, recovery in that whole season was quite challenging for me. Definitely was on medication to support my mood second and third time because the first time had been so hard. I don't think I adjusted well. I don't think I bonded very well with my first because of the trauma that my body had gone through and just the shock of never sleeping. Like I just really struggled. I also didn't realize at that time of my life, which is the learning journey I've been on, with how much I struggle with dependence. So that was and some attachment issues around that.
Dependence as in someone being so dependent on you.
Yeah. So I found that quite claustrophobic. And I had no idea up to that point that dependence was so challenging for me. Looking back, I can see how that played out in some friendships, but and you know, in lots of relationships in life. But it was then I was like, whoa, I really find this quite triggering. Like really, it puts me in a bad emotional space, the dependence that comes with mothering. So I learned a lot through those first early years. My third was really hard. He cried for 3 years. He just cried and cried and cried and cried. And it was definitely not a case of the third one just slipping
in. Yeah. People had said that to me about having number 2, and then my number 2 had colic. And I was like, so she's not just fitting into my life revolves around her.
Yes.
Like,
Totally. So
Yeah.
he basically lived on me for 3 years in terms of every day. All his naps ended up having to basically be on me. He just like was so intense having a 2 and a 3-year-old, and then a 3 and a 4-year-old. It was like they're all home, no school. It was a full on time.
Where do you go?
Yeah, yeah. And he's not at all like that now. He's a very happy child, which is so fascinating.
Yeah.
But yeah, those years were not, I think of the baby years as like not being made for me.
Same. 100%. I can relate to that so strongly. Yeah.
But these years are much, much better. So they're 17 and 11 and entering into that tween prepubescent season with the older two. And I really like that. Talk lots of great chats about, crushes and sex and puberty and big feelings and friendship. And I can sit quite comfortably in that space. So this is definitely my preferred season.
Have you always been someone who's been good at having difficult conversations, or did that come with your training? Like, do you think that is a natural thing, or?
I think it is. I think it is quite natural. I think what's unique to some extent about me is that I'm very, very boundaried. So I don't actually take on what's happening so emotionally. So you could tell me a lot of very, very hard things and I will just be perfectly fine. And I think that it's really challenging to be in a therapeutic role if you don't have that.
Yeah.
And so I actually think people in therapeutic roles are the best kind of people in that space are the ones who are heavily boundaried, who have empathy to a point because they dive in with the person, but they can also dive way out.
Yeah.
So I'm not like sitting up at night thinking about clients or anything. And I also have quite a trust in my kids that they'll figure stuff out. So I don't like wear it on myself all the time. So I think I do cope quite well in hard conversations.
Do you find it that it's like the same? Because I know for me, I've got like, work brain and home brain. Do you, when your kids are having difficult conversations, are you in that work brain or is it a different brain? Does it all sit? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I do actually somewhat intentionally tap into work brain.
Yeah.
And so recently, for example, one of my boys had their puberty talk at school and I thought, I'm going to put on my professional hat, and that doesn't mean that I am not like, it doesn't mean that I'm not making jokes and like being warm and friendly, but I also go, okay, what are all the things that he needs to know at this age? Think about his development, his language, like I do that. I don't expect other people to do that at all. And it's just that I've been able to research the kind of the space and the field for such a long time that I can tap into that. But I also, intentionally go, it's okay if he doesn't agree with me, or it's okay if he doesn't understand this, and I can circle back and around and talk about it with him another time. So I take some of the heat out of it.
Yeah.
It's okay if he makes mistakes. It's okay if he does something that, I don't like. And that's all right. Like, we'll journey through it. So just taking some of the emotion out of the space.
Yeah. Question 2 is, what does successful parenting mean or look like to you?
Yeah. If they continue to enjoy our company. So if we remain connected enough that they enjoy time with us, that's really valuable to me. So that they feel safe in our company emotionally. I think it's a real success if your child can tell you something that they don't like about you.
Yeah.
And you can sit with that, or they can tell you, like I asked one of my kids recently, and I ask them this every once in a while, is there anything we do that you'd prefer we don't? And I think that that's a mark of any kind of successful relationship, actually, is when you can reflect back what you're finding challenging about the person and they can take it.
Yeah.
And so that's really important. I want adventure and fun is very important in our family. It's of a very high priority. And so that's all part of them enjoying our company, is feeling like we have a lot of fun together. Our family goes, like, we have great experiences together. And so we become part of their positive memories.
Yeah.
And so those are the things that come to mind. I mean, I could go on about that for quite a while, but
yeah. How did, were you and Dave always in agreement on those kinds of values as co-parents, or is that something you intentionally worked on together?
I would say we were in agreement, but that's because we had a lot of very intentional conversations when we were dating and engaged. So we were not like we actually ended up getting married quite quickly in contrast to some other people. But in that time, we really went there
Yeah.
on all the things. So it was, division of labor in the house. It was core values in parenting. It was how do we want their education to look? What kinds of suburbs do we want to live in and how will that impact our kids? And then how will we navigate that? And so, yeah, who's going to work more and less and finances? I was definitely very, very intentional because my greatest fear, and I think my parents instilled this into me, I'm really thankful for that. My greatest fear was being what I felt was going to be trapped in a relationship that was going to hinder me, hinder my kids. I really had to feel confident in the person I was choosing. And
Yeah.
so I asked a lot of hard questions to get to that point. So, yeah, we were in agreement, but that's not just by luck.
Yeah. Yeah. And did you, we can move on from this if you don't want to talk about this. Did you grow up Christian?
Yeah, so grew up in the church and grew up with Christian parents. I have a faith myself.
Yeah.
It's been on a journey.
Yeah. I only asked because I also did too. My husband and I met at church, and we're also doing this at the moment as well.
Yeah.
Especially since having kids, trying to figure out where that all fits, but that's by the by. But when it's very interesting talking to people who grew up in church and met in church and about like pre-marriage counselling and that whole idea of pre-marriage counselling, because my husband and I did that, and through that process had all those conversations where we were literally writing down like who's going to take the bins out, who's going to drop the kids at kindy. Like we had all of those conversations through that process. And I know from the outside, some people must be like, that is bizarre. But I am so grateful that we went through that process.
It's
so good.
Yeah, 100%. I've actually done pre-marriage counselling for some couples. And yeah, I just think it's something everyone should do.
I bet your pre-marriage counselling didn't have anything about mums being the helper homemakers and dad being the home leader though, which...
No, I was told that by other people.
Yes.
But I grew up with a strongly feminist set of parents. My dad is a strong feminist, and so there was no chance that was going to stick.
Yeah. The people who took our pre-marriage counselling were like good friends of my family, and I remember saying to them like, there's bits and pieces of this that I'm just going to leave here and not take with me, and they're like, yeah, we pretty much expected that.
Yeah. So tragic.
So good. Okay, question 3 is, what is something about your parenting style that feels unique or unique-ish to you?
Well, I'll go with what my friends would say. So it doesn't feel unique in terms of I don't feel like it's radical in any way, but what my friends would say would be that I let my kids do a lot of things that they would initially feel as unsafe.
Yeah.
So part of my whole, I want my kids to grow up with a sense of adventure is that they are allowed to do a lot of risky things. And I strongly believe in risk as an experience for our kids. And I mean our kids as a society. I wish that kids experienced more risk. So they were always allowed to do things earlier than their friends were, whether that's walk to school or go swimming out in the deep water or go further away that we can't see or build a fire or use a saw or, they were always climbing cliffs whilst other parents were saying not to. And I completely respect everyone's decisions. So there was never a sense of me going like, why don't you let your kids do that? But it just was like, that's how I like automatically respond, as if they say something, I'm like, yeah, sure. Like, I think that, having a broken arm is a marker of a great childhood. Like I'm like, if you didn't have a few scars and burns and broken limbs, I'm not sure what you did. So they all have those.
Yeah, that's great. I feel like you were born to be a boy parent if that is your like natural state of being.
Yeah, and they all do push boundaries in terms of my youngest is the most cautious, but they're definitely like, we went to French Polynesia last year and they're like, where are the sharks, let's swim with them ASAP. That is their approach. And in COVID they built a fire every day and they just did a lot of stuff.
Lit stuff on fire.
Yeah, was definitely doing a lot of things that
Yeah.
I wouldn't assume a lot of other 2-year-olds were doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, my middle boy has cut his head open, broken his nose, pulled off toenails, pulled off fingernails. Like there's been a lot of things
Oh,
because they just try.
A&E must be like, oh, here come the Robertsons. Classic.
Yeah, they just try things and I'm good with that. I think that my friends would also say is that I am very, very controlling of their technology and
Hmm.
their kind of entertainment device stuff.
Yeah.
So I'm the most controlling person I know in that area, apart from probably my colleague Holly. We're the
May
same,
make sense.
but she's the
Yeah, I
same.
mean, I did want to ask, like, if you're happy to talk about, like, what the rules are in your family for
Yeah.
things around, like, technology, internet time, all of that.
Yes. Yeah, happy to talk about that. I mean, I actually don't think I'm that extreme, but in contrast to other people, it seems that I am. I would be more than I am. I temper myself quite a lot.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
It must be such a hard line for you to walk to know the extent of how gross the internet is and not
yes.
just being like, you can never go on the internet and actually letting them, it
Well,
must
they
be
don't
hard
go on
for
the
you.
internet.
Fair enough.
So they never have independent access to the internet. And
Yeah.
what I mean by independent is that they're never in a space by themselves
Hmm.
where they could be online. So it's no screens during the week. Then on the weekend, they can have in the mornings, they're allowed screen time. And then they play games on Apple Arcade.
Yeah.
So we don't have a Nintendo or a PlayStation or anything like that, primarily because it can access the internet. But then also they've never bought one. So I've always said if you want something, you got to pay for it. And so
Yeah.
you've got to save money or that's got to be for your Christmas present, literally from everyone in your whole life,
Yeah.
because I'm not paying $400 for something I don't value.
Yeah. And
So,
necessarily want in your house.
yeah, so, they've been allowed to do that for the last couple of years, but all of them have chosen for it not to be a priority. So they've chosen to buy sports gear instead or things like that.
Yeah.
So they're allowed game time in the weekend up until 9 a.m. And then so sometimes on the weekends they like to try and wake themselves up quite early. But then they can watch a movie on Saturday or Sunday night, sometimes with us, but that's their only game time is Saturday and Sunday morning.
Yeah.
And they go on Friday afternoon. So today is a Friday. They go to a Minecraft club. So at the local library, it's a supervised club where a group of kids get together on the same network and play Minecraft together. And that's my gift to them because and the agreement is that they will never ever ask me for Minecraft at home.
Yeah.
And so they have stuck to that. I think
Nice.
they go through waves of feeling like they're missing out. And then other times they've moved on from it and they don't care. So I know that every once in a while we're just going to ride a wave of them feeling left out, but I know that usually ends at some point. So there's no conversation about phones. My oldest.
I was gonna say, like, when that happens,
Yeah.
do you have a plan? What's your
So
your
my
thoughts?
oldest would like to get a phone when he goes to high school. That's his hope, but I have said there's no commitment on my end. So
Yeah.
I will not commit to an age or a stage. I will see kind of who you are in terms of if I can trust you. So I say things to them like, if I can trust you in the small things, then I can trust you with the bigger things. And I need to see your responsibility because it's usually a very expensive device.
Yeah.
So this is the part that I also really boggles my mind is my kids still lose their drink bottles. I just would never entrust them with what is probably $1,000 device.
Crazy.
They're going to drop that.
Immediately, too. Immediately. Out of the box on the floor.
Yeah. So for me, it's also very practical.
Yeah.
And I've said that to them. I'm like, until you can basically keep the same drink bottle for 3 months, I'm not convinced you can have anything more expensive than that.
That's great. That's so good.
Yeah, so I don't feel like that's very strict, but then compared to families, apparently it is. And I think lots of other families have everyday screen time, or their kids are having devices in their bedrooms, or they have their own iPad or something like that, or they have a Nintendo and they can talk to their friends online. There's definitely none of that in my house.
Yeah. Yeah. And something that has been brought up by a few different parents who have been on this podcast is adolescence, which if you're listening to this in a few years' time, it's big in the zeitgeist right now. It's a show on Netflix about a little boy who kills, or a little boy, he's about 13, who kills one of his classmates. And it sort of comes out that he's been indoctrinated in the far right kind of incel kind of culture online. And his parents have no idea because he's been accessing it online through his screen in his bedroom. What have your thoughts and response been around adolescence? And also, what's your advice to parents who have watched adolescence and absolutely panicked?
Yeah, I mean, I'm basically for anything that prompts conversation. So I think it's great for everyone to watch it. It's really important to hold what a show does in tension with all the other factors we know that impact violence and sexual violence. So we know that, for example, seeing a parent or seeing a role model, particularly for boys, seeing a male role model be aggressive, be controlling, being dominating is very, very impactful for the way that they will treat girls and women in the future. And that show does highlight that. He had quite an angry dad, and his also was quite controlling in my view as somebody who deals with relationships. So that definitely would have had an influence.
It's interesting watching that as a professional, isn't it? Because I feel like a lot of the conversation was like, oh, but his parents were so sweet and his dad was so sweet. And I just did not get that impression at all.
No. He did, the dad did what I would call push-pull. So he's like, push you away, treat you badly, pull you in, tell you I love you. And that is a really toxic relationship pattern. It has really significant negative impacts on the person who's being pushed and pulled. So in his pull moments, when he's drawing her in, he was really sweet. But in his push moments, he was very aggressive and controlling.
Yeah.
So, I mean, he shut down conversations where she wasn't allowed an opinion. It was pretty bad. Also, there was bullying, and that is really impactful. So there was a number of factors that were at play. What I didn't like in the rhetoric around the show was people who made it all about social media or being online, but then also people who did the opposite, and they were like, it's nothing to do with what's online. And it's everything to do with the patriarchy and misogyny and the dad and stuff. And I was like, well, surely we can hold all of those things as factors. And we should be comfortable with talking about all of them and addressing all of them. Like, isn't that how we change society, is by addressing all the factors, not just one? So, yes, was it about radicalization in the incel community online? Definitely. Was it about him feeling ostracized and bullied and belittled? Definitely. Was it about dad? Definitely. There was a lot going on. So people who panicked, okay, everybody needs what I call an oh shit moment.
Yep.
And as long as you use that emotion to propel forward, that can be really helpful. Panic can be a helpful feeling if it's used, not if you stay in that space. So learn about how you talk about gender. The messages you give about what it means to be a boy and how you show emotion to your boys. 100% learn about that. Think about your relationship and what you're modeling. Are you modeling affection, empathy, kindness, intimacy? Or are you modeling cold, hard, edgy, friction, tense, eggshell? And then also think about what your kids are doing online. Like when they have access to strangers on the internet, that is just so extremely risky. And that boy was young. Yeah. Too young to have access to strangers online. And I mean, in my opinion, still too young to be having a gaming console in his room, because that's how kids access people online. A 9-year-old in my community, she disclosed to me just in a casual conversation that she had 2 online boyfriends through her PlayStation. Yeah. Yucky. And that happens because she's alone with a device that she can talk to strangers on. That's preventable, completely preventable. So, I think use that panic, watch it, use the panic, propel change.
And for a parent who's never entered into any kind of thought about having these conversations with their children, obviously I would direct them towards your resources for sure, but are there any other spaces that are good for them that you would direct people towards that's a good introduction?
Good for
them to learn?
Parents.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you can do a Google search and find a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Like it is quite a saturated space for parents, I would say. What I tried to do with the Tricky Chats course was stop the need to go and find out about abuse and find out about, gaming, and then also find out about how to talk about puberty and just pull that together. And
Yeah.
because so much of the messages overlap, like you can't talk about porn without talking about sex. And
Yeah.
you can't talk about sex actually without talking about porn quite quickly afterwards. And
Yeah.
you can't talk about porn without talking about the internet, and you can't talk about the internet without talking about grooming. Like for me, they
Yeah.
all are so heavily woven. So there's heaps and heaps of great information online that if you just can search for, definitely you'll get a lot of good content. Yeah, that's what I wanted to do was
Yeah.
how these topics overlap and just create a bit of a like a one space.
And I think, like, obviously I've got very little children, but I have worked with, excuse me, bug in my throat. I have worked with lots of parents in the sort of like tween age space. And I've seen a lot of parents in kind of this space of like overwhelm of like, I just don't even know where to start. I don't know how to start having these conversations. And they sort of want to like address everything at once. And do you have advice on like, like, is it, 10 minutes a day? Is there any kind of, is it as it comes up? Like, what's the,
Yeah. Yeah, well, you think in terms of ages and stages, so you definitely don't need to talk about all of the things before they're 5, but there are maybe 3 things you want to make sure you knock off. And so, like, we can go into what those are, but if you think like, oh, these are the topics I really want them to understand before they go to school.
yeah,
And we know that kids at that age, for example, that conversation needs to happen between 6 and 10 times before they adopt that information. So simple messages they can adopt between 4 and 8 times. More complicated messages they adopt between 8 and 14 times. So actually the amount of times you have the exact same conversation is really, really important.
Interesting.
And I can't even describe to you how many times I have had the same conversation about sex with one of my kids, like the exact same chat over and over and over again. And we also know for people to have extra context that if your child is neurodiverse, they need it even more times.
Yeah.
So they struggle to retain that information. So think in terms of subjects, timeframes, and numbers, frequency.
Yeah.
So you don't need to talk about sex before they're 5. Like you don't even need to really worry about it unless they're persisting at you over and over and over again and you're tired of that and then you want to give them an answer.
Yeah.
I offer the actual scripts in the Tricky Chats course. So, because, I don't just assume people will just know automatically what to say.
Yeah.
But also you can just use a book and then you just read that book to them, 8 times over the course of 2 years. And you've done a really great job.
Yeah.
So we can break it down a little bit more than what people maybe first assume.
Yeah. Don't panic, everyone. So you can break it down.
Yeah.
Something else that because I followed you for a little while, that I believe is quite unique about your parenting style is that you went on a big old boat trip with your kids. And that is, to me, wild. So do you want to talk a little bit about that experience?
Yeah, so we've done 3 international significant trips. So the first one we did was we spent 5 months in Fiji on a boat, and that was really intense.
Yeah. I loved following that. I thought that was just so interesting. Like, it was some of my, I know your life isn't content, but it was so interesting to follow along with. It was interesting. Yeah.
It was interesting to be in it. I get incredibly seasick and...
So 5 months on a boat makes sense.
Yeah. Living on a boat is a really unique thing to do. In terms of it's a unique way to live. You run out of food really quickly. The very purpose of living on a boat in the islands is to go to remote villages. So places with no power, like people cooking in the ground, like really, really remote, authentic village life.
Yeah.
And one of the villages that we went to is an island called Fulanga, and you're given a host family, so only boats can go there, no one else. So you can imagine that there's not a lot of visitors. And so we went there with a group of about 3 families that you just meet while you're boating, sailing around. And so we went there, and then we're given a host family who will kind of treat you well, answer questions, give you meals. You go to their church, there's only one church, but you go to church with them. And anyway, I remember that she had got up at 4 a.m, the mum, and been cooking for us in the ground until lunchtime. And then I ate into, I can't remember even what it was, but I ate into it, and there was like a large creature in the food, and it was wrapped in a banana leaf. And so, of course, you're cooking in the ground and with a banana leaf. Like, there's going to
Yeah.
be creatures in the food.
Yeah.
And so I had to just figure that one out.
Yeah. On the fly thinking.
Yeah, so you have like all these really interesting, fantastic experiences, and all the kids in those villages are literally playing with rubbish. And I grew up in the Philippines for about 6 years, and that's what I used to do too, was play with rubbish. Like that was your toys. And it was
Yeah.
so cool seeing it. And that doesn't make the kids less happy. Like we all look at that and be like, oh, it's so sad. They're not sad. They're fine.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
they're really happy. They've got a tire and a stick, and they're playing
Yeah.
a really great game with
And
that.
it's really fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I wanted the kids to see that kind of life as well. And
Do you think because you grew up in the Philippines for a bit, did you want to pass that on? Like, was that an element of it, or just
yeah,
a
like
fun coincidence?
our kids have a lot of privilege
Mm.
in many, many different ways, but they're not wanting for anything, like
Yeah.
it's not as though they're like living some kind of lavish life, but I would say that they're not wanting for anything. So they're not struggling. They get to play the sports they want. They get to largely eat the kind of food that they want. They're doing just fine.
Yeah.
And it's so important to me and to Dave that they see other ways of living, not from a looking down upon that or those people are suffering and sad. But, sometimes it's that, but also holding those people with great value and like, what can we learn from them?
Yeah.
So, yeah, not this kind of rich to poverty mindset, but
And not coming in as like a savior complex either.
yeah, totally. I mean, lots of the people in those villages, they helped us. They gave us food. We needed food. There's no shops.
Hey guys, we're hungry.
We were hungry, like really hungry. And so I was really sick of eating canned tuna and rice, and they give you food and you swap it for oil, and like it's really
Yeah.
cool way of doing life. Yeah, and then last year we went to Sri Lanka for a month, totally different kind of experience. And then we went to French Polynesia also on a boat for a month. And so, yeah, all different and interesting and lots of learning.
What is the highlight and the low light from those, particularly those boating experiences, for you?
I mean, the highlights have to be the exposure to beauty you can't get by land. So the term untouched is really real, in that if you go to a beach that nobody's literally stood on
Amazing.
for maybe months at a time, that beach is really amazing. Yeah, the feeling of being the only person on an island and perfectly clear water, no rubbish, because they're so remote. And that just has to be the highlights, is the beauty that you get to experience. And then the lowlights are that, living in a confined space is very, very difficult. So not being the kids aren't able to get space from each other. That is very, very challenging for one of my kids. He gets what I think is like quite claustrophobic, and so he reacts quite significantly. The fighting is worse than it is at
Interesting.
home.
Yeah.
So the behavior that you're navigating, I would say, is heightened. Like lots of people would be like, oh, they're going to be so happy because they're just going to be in nature. It's like, no, we're going to be on a boat.
Yeah.
And sometimes for 24 hours at a time, like not even able to get off the boat. I'm going to be vomiting that whole time. And
Joe.
you can't make food on a boat that's going up and down on waves. So it's really hard.
Yeah.
The behavior is evident of that.
Yeah. Oh, that's so interesting. I feel like I could talk to you for a whole hour just about those experiences. So I'm going to move on. But that is so fascinating. And it was so interesting to follow along with you guys. So our fourth question is, what has your biggest what the fuck was that moment been since becoming a parent? Just like, what the fuck is happening right now?
It's good. It's good. I do think the fighting between kids, at least between mine, sometimes shocks me. I thought that they would get along more.
Yeah, interesting.
And particularly my kids are so close in age, like the two oldest being 16 months apart. I didn't know how kind of intense those relationships could be. I mean, I would say I had an intense sibling relationships, but for some reason I thought that was unique. But the dynamics, the need to process who your sibling is as a person, I do a lot of that with the kids. Like,
Yeah.
this is why you find them annoying, and this is what about you that they find annoying, and it's like the personality stuff. And I mean, there's probably been other times I've had more what the fuck moments, but this is the one that I'm never going
That's
to
the
is the trying to teach them how to do relationship with each other
yeah.
is unexpected.
It is interesting, like, you have children and you're like, this is my relationship to my children, and you sort of, it's easy to forget that, like, they are also going to be in relationship with each other for a lot longer than they're going to be in relationship with you. Like, they're going to have each other forever. We're not going to be here forever.
Yeah.
And that is so, for some reason, easy to forget. But yeah, it's so interesting. Even watching, so my oldest is 3 and my youngest is 5 months. And even that dynamic already about, like, Freddie being upset that I have to hang out with Max or, like, feed her first because she doesn't understand that she has to wait and he has to wait. And, like, all of those kind of dynamics of, like, making sure there's not resentment with each other. Like, all of that stuff is so interesting from day one. So interesting.
And what you don't have yet, which you have to come, is their actual personalities.
Yeah.
Because I don't think you can predict that yet.
No.
And like who my kids were at 2 is really different to who they are now.
Yeah, which I'm quite glad to hear, because I feel like so often there's that messaging, not that my kids aren't delightful, I'd love them to stay like this forever, but they're just not going to.
Yeah.
But because I feel like so often people are like, you can tell exactly who they're going to be from the minute they pop out. And I'm like, no, I don't think that's true. I don't think I am the way that I was when I was a baby. I think I'm very different.
Yeah. And I think there's, you know, there might be a few touches of things like, oh, they were always a deep sleeper, or, oh, they were okay with time by themselves. You know, there might be little things, but what you don't see until later is their real personality, and how even if you find that personality fine, the sibling that is like the worst case scenario for their personality, and having to teach them, how to do that with each other. And that surprised me, the level to which I have to do that.
Yeah. Do you think on the whole your children get along?
On the whole, 2 of them.
Yeah. Yeah. I think this is a really good thing to be honest about, because all we see are these, like, happy-dappy families who are, you know?
No, we don't have that. We definitely have completely contrasting personalities that are very triggering for each other. And they would never choose that person as their playmate.
Yeah. And so you're, like, navigating, nurturing that relationship, and also finding space for them, and, like, all of that fun stuff. Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. I mean, even the word nurturing is, I think we need to take the pressure off the sibling relationship. So I don't think we have to, I don't think they have to get along. Like, I think they have to be respectful and kind, but I react against the idea that our kids must like each other.
They don't need to be best friends.
They don't even need to like each other.
Need to be friends. Yeah.
And that's actually okay. It's not our job to make sure that they are like this cohesive little crew. Like, that would be nice, but I think that's a bonus. And I think I guess I take the position of really validating what they're experiencing. Yeah. And letting them feel what they're feeling about the other person, but teaching them how to respond to people they struggle with.
Yeah.
So, I am like, you don't have to, and I'll say that to them, like, you don't have to like each other. Like, you don't have to be friends. You don't have to want to spend time together. No worries on my end. Yeah. We shouldn't pressure them to have a relationship that they don't want to have. Like, we wouldn't do that with anyone else.
Yeah, no.
But I do, I still hold the values of being kind, respectful, and empathetic as, we have to be that to everyone in our life, whether we like them or not. Yeah. Yeah. So that's been just a surprise.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. That's really interesting. And then the final question, we've made it to the end. If you were listening to this podcast on the day you became a parent, what would you want yourself to hear?
You don't have to like it that much.
Yes.
It's okay to be thinking, what happened to my life?
I've ruined my life.
But your children should never, ever feel that. So you're allowed to struggle. Like, you're definitely allowed to struggle. You're allowed to struggle with who they are as people. You're allowed to struggle with the decisions they make. You're allowed to struggle with, the change in your identity and career, and like all of that is okay. But they should never feel that struggle. So that's my challenge, both to myself and other people. Like,
Yeah.
I actually really don't like it, for example, when people complain about school holidays in front of their kids, because your kid knows as a result that you don't really like that time with them.
Yeah, and is hearing you say, I don't like having my children at home with me.
That's what they're hearing.
Yeah, awful.
And I'm just like, it's just not that cool.
Yeah.
So you're allowed to feel all of those feelings, and you're just totally fine, but just don't convey it
Yeah.
to them.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Jo, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It was an absolute delight to have you here, and just so amazing after following you for so long and seeing all your amazing content that you're bringing out, to get to tickle your brain a little bit and like find things out for myself. It's selfishly very enjoyable for me. Thank you so much. Is there anything that you would like to plug in this space for people to go and check out, or courses or anything like that that you'd like people to know about?
Yes. So I have 4 online courses. One is Tricky Chats, so that's trickychatsparenting.com, and that's talking about, we've covered all the things that goes through.
Yeah, if you had any questions that you were like, oh, I've got that, go look at Tricky Chats, because she'll have an answer there.
Definitely. And then I have 3 sex intimacy courses. So one is the Better Sex Couples course. So that's for your kind of everyday couple who are like, it's all feeling a little bit blah, or I don't really like it that much. What do I do about that? And then there's the postpartum one. So that's for parents with babies up to 2 years old. And intimacy, how does that look? What do you need to understand and know about your body, etc.?
Yeah.
And then sexual pain. What do you do if sex is actually painful? And that's designed for female sexual pain. And what steps to take? Who do you see as a professional? What do you need to understand?
Awesome. Amazing. Thank you so much.
Why do you parent like that?
I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Why Do You Parent Like That? Why Do You Parent Like That is a podcast created and hosted by me, Abby Harrison. A big shout out to my nephew Thomas and my niece Frances for lending their voices to my jingle, and to everyone who is helping me with their expertise on podcasting while I figure this out. Any resources mentioned in today's pod will be linked in the show notes alongside our sponsors. Please follow Why Do You Parent Like That on your podcast platform of choice, and follow us on our TikTok and Instagram at Why Do You Parent Like That podcast for more behind the scenes and reveals of upcoming guests. If you have a story you think would be great to share, please send me an email at whydoyouparentlikeThatpodcast@gmail.com. Love you. Say it back.